Have you ever been a member of a team or task force charged to do advanced planning? Raise your hand. You were charged as a unit to set in motion a series of actions that would impact the future of your organization. But there always seems to be one member of the group who sees it as his or her job to warn about what would happen if certain changes took effect. Such a person often feels that his or her advice is largely unheeded. Sometimes such a person will look back with snarky satisfaction of seeing the warnings come true, which are not necessarily satisfactory to that person. Even in the face of the exponential growth of communication, electronic and otherwise, it often seems impossible for people to believe what they are being told. Even if people report things over and over again, the news still is slow, if impossible, to sink in. You can probably give a case in point in your own household. We can't, as we say, truly hear what is being said. We may hear the sound the words make, but they don't seem to register with us. Now, Jesus had spoken of his own resurrection at various stages in Luke's Gospel from chapter 9 onwards. Two of his greatest parables end with a strong reference to rising from the dead. But nobody got what he was saying ahead of time. They were puzzled, and understandably so. Resurrection in the first century world was what God would do at the end time for all the righteous dead, giving new bodies to everyone from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob down to the most recent righteous martyrs. Yes, people would speak of a prophet like Elijah or John the Baptist returning from the dead, but what they meant by that was that someone would come who seemed to embody the same spirit, the same prophecy. The resurrection itself would be a general, large-scale event. After Israel's great and final suffering, then and only then all God's faithful people would be raised up and given new life and new bodies. We shouldn't be startled then at how surprised all the characters were on the first Easter Sunday morning. It wasn't just a lack of faith that had stopped them from understanding what Jesus had said up in Galilee about his rising again. It was simply that nobody had ever dreamed that one single living person would be killed and then be raised to a new bodily life the other side of the grave. The group of women weren't expecting Jesus' personal resurrection from the dead. They weren't going to the tomb extra early, saying to themselves, gee, we've got the spices in case he's still dead, but let's hope he's alive. They knew well enough that dead people remained dead. As one funeral director once said to me years ago in Roanoke, Virginia, Pastor, when I straighten them out, they stay that way. The 11 disciples certainly weren't expecting Jesus' personal resurrection from the dead. They took what the women were reporting to be an idle tale, The Greek root word is more forceful and means something along the lines of a bunch of bull. We get the English word delirious from it. Perhaps the disciples felt the story too far-fetched. Perhaps they didn't trust the women. Me Too hadn't swept their consciousness yet. Perhaps they were so swamped with their own grief to recall Jesus' prior promise that he would defeat death. Brothers and sisters, the opening environment of Easter morning is one of surprise, astonishment, fear, confusion, and slow realization. All parties warmed to the good news at the pace of a crock pot rather than the pace of a microwave. Yes, Jesus did say ahead of time that the Son of Man must suffer and die and then rise on the third day. He told us so, all right. But we still don't know what's going on, what it all means, and what will happen next. Easter is always a surprise, whether we meet it in celebrating the festival itself or in the mysterious ways God's grace breaks into the small and great deaths in our lives. New life is an overwhelming reality and takes time to sink in and appreciate. And Luke reminds us that it takes a village to spread the news around until it finally registers deep down into the hearts of all the people. Resurrection is good news precisely because it dares to tell us things we didn't expect, weren't inclined to believe, and couldn't readily comprehend. Hallelujah, Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed. Hallelujah.